Hi, I'm Richard Ashworth. I'm here to talk to you about Hexagram 37, Ren, the members of the family. Confucius comments that it is by proper regulation of each family that the whole world is stabilized. By proper regulation of each family, the whole world is stabilized. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at the structure. We're going to look at it line by line, and we're going to look at the overall meaning of the hexagram as I see it. But I'll try to do three things. One is to give you some ideas of what you might make of it if you simply just throw it in the course of divination. Two, to talk about the underlying timeless wisdom that is there. And three, I may talk a little bit about the context of today when I'm speaking, which is very early in 2024. But that last bit I won't make too much of because it's kind of has a short shelf life. So let's start with a structure. Ren hexagram 37 is wind over fire. That is to say, it is, starting from the bottom, yang, yin, yang, yin, yang, yang. You might like, by the way, to have a copy of the Book of Changes in front of you, so you might like to pause this and have it so you can look at it. The Book of Changes that I tend to use is Wu Jing Yuan's Yi, Y-I, actually Y-I, one word, J-I-N-G, two words, which is a diviner's Book of Changes. The Wilhelm edition, obviously, is the authoritative reference work. There's a really good one by John Blofeld, and there are several others, but get the text in front of you if you can. You'll be able to find it online. So if you want to pause me and look it out, that might be useful. So we have this structure, the members of the family. The balance is that there are 4 yang lines and 2 yin lines. So not quite balanced. And you will notice that the yin lines are inside, the yang lines are outside. The implication in the family being that the women folk are inside and the wagons are formed in a circle of the men around the outside. And we may question some of the assumptions in that, in the sense that a Confucian approach and a lot of Confucian interpretation is a very patriarchal kind of a position, and we might consider whether we are in the beginning of the 21st century going to look at it that way. There is correspondence, that is, if you like, cooperation between line 1 and line 4, because line 1 is a yang line and line 4 is a yin line, and the same with 2 and 5, though the other way round. Line 1, because it is yang, that is firm, that is strong, that is male, that is, all that kind of stuff, is reckoned to be, it should be fall on an odd numbered line. So 1 is correct. It's not central. Central is reckoned to make it even better because it's to do with the middle path and being moderate and so on and so forth. But it is central and it is firm. The rulers of this hexagram are the 2nd and the 5th. They are the middle lines, which is very often what happens. And in point of fact, if you think about it, only line 5 can be both firm, central, and correct. And the majority of hexagrams, the Book of Changes, the leader, that is to say, the line that typifies what's going on, or the line that is most useful, is so very often the 5th line, sometimes called the host as well. There's also this interaction between the lines, a metaphor of the family working together. So you have line 1 and line 2 will work, yang and yin. Line 2 and 3 will work together, yin and yang. Line 3 and 4, and so on. So that there is this metaphor of interaction. And in point of fact, one way of looking at this is it is the structure of the Confucian dining table, Confucian dining room, if you like, where the father is at the top, in charge, ruling. The first son is at the 5th line, his wife is at the 4th, the 2nd son is at the 3rd line, his wife is at the 2nd, and the 3rd son is at the bottom. So there is something inherently patriarchal about who is represented and who is not necessarily. The mother, by the way, maybe a bit of an afterthought, but is usually thought of as being at the 2nd line. But again, we have this very patriarchal view. And you see, perhaps a little bit of history is in order here. And the Book of Changes is at least 3,000 years old. And the names, the titles of each of the hexagrams are that old. They're at least that old. This method, this language of yin and yang lines, broken and unbroken lines, where a broken broadly means yes, good, strong, all that kind of. Unbroken means yes, good, strong, all that kind of stuff, and a broken means the reverse. Is significantly older than that. But of the actual text that we've got, the only bit that is quite that old for certain is the name of the hexagram and the text that applies to the hexagram, what is called the guasi, as opposed to the yaosi, which is the text attached to the lines. The text attached to the lines was attached. The story goes that it was attached a generation later, but the story that we may be being told, it was attached by a different way of thinking. And I think this hexagram is really interesting in that way. The picture, the ideograph, is of a house and a body in a prone position. The nuclear, which is the hexagram you arrive at by a trick by moving the lines around, which I won't go into today, is where this all came from. And interestingly, the hexagram that is the nuclear, the source of whatever situation it is we are addressing here, is number 64, which is the final hexagram, which you might think it'd be odd for its title to be not yet complete. But this is a kind of a Chinese joke. Hexagram 64 is not yet complete, meaning everything goes on forever. The road goes forever on. Hexagram 63 is complete, as we shall discover a little bit later. Wind over fire is generally reckoned to mean this is a warm, inviting hexagram. Wind and fire, by the way, both being yin hexagrams, both relating to the daughters, the second and eldest daughter, respectively. Now, here's where it starts to get interesting. The Gua text is Li Nu Chun. I'm not going to attempt to try and accent that correctly, which means prophet in a woman's divination. It is as stark as that. This is called members of the family, Cha Ren, and the only text we have that is goes right back to the original is prophet in a woman's divination. Now, what we're going to discover about it is very interesting, given that. This is usually interpreted as being talking about, on the level of timeless wisdom, if you like, the importance of a virtuous woman. In the 21st century, you might consider what we mean by a virtuous woman. Those criteria are not necessarily obvious. But the idea is being that a virtuous woman is key to a family that works, a woman that can be relied upon in all sorts of ways. But also, as we should find, this hexagram has been used as a kind of manifesto for legalism, whose underlying idea is that a country is more stable if there are more punishments than there are rewards, which is probably an idea that many of us would argue with, but we'll probably return to that. And anyway, the traditional commentaries emphasize the value of docility in a woman, which again is something we might talk about. And there are two. I pointed out to you that the women are inside, the men are outside. So the hosts, one is in the outer gua, in the top gua, the top trigram, and one is on the inner gua, that is the lower trigram. But if we just address this from the standpoint of what do we do with this as a piece of advice, we profit in a woman's divination. That tends to mean that we should talk things out, that we should open ourselves to criticism, to advice, to learning. We should not keep decisions to ourselves. Perhaps we bring them to the whole family, but certainly we bring them to a woman's divination. In the case of myself, I mean, what I would do is to talk with my wife. I mean, I don't make serious decisions without talking with her. And there's a whole underlying principle there, because one of the things that's being debated here is what's called surrender, the idea of giving in And there are those who see the refusal to give in as itself a virtue, and I'm not sure whether it absolutely is. And there was a movement in the US in the 90s, I think, of surrendered women who saw their job as being to provide pipe and slippers and sex on demand and, looking after all the things that their husbands didn't want to look after and making sure that he was kind of stood by, as Tammy Wynette might say. If that were done responsibly, not necessarily a mad idea, done irresponsibly, I mean, it's also all sorts of violence involved in that. Discuss. But here's the thing. We have this prophet in a woman's divination, and then we go to a series of lines that appear to say something very, very different. So, looking at the first Yao text, the first line text, we have, with firm boundaries around the family, regret is done with. So it's a strong yang line, it's firm and correct, but it's not central. It's about limits, constraints. There are times to say no, setting up ground rules, consistent structure. It suggests that education starts early. So in terms of what you might make of it, if you wanted advice from the Book of Changes, it says to examine your place in a structure, perhaps. It says, perhaps look at the value of rules and consistency and see the extent to which you are applying those to your life, and perhaps that whatever conundrum it is you're dealing with is consistent with that. What I would say very much about this hexagram is that I would pay more attention to the hexagram that we are directed to by changing the line in each case than the line text. What is strange to me about this hexagram is that it's about trusting a woman's divination, and then it does all sorts of stuff that seems to be very much at odds with that from a very different standpoint. And it perhaps reflects the fact that this idea of the Tao, the way, the moment, the Tao that can be spoken of is not the Tao, which predates Confucius by a very long time. And the Tao, as far as I can tell, the process, going with the process, going with the flow, that kind of thing, as far as I can tell, it has no particular social remit. It doesn't have a goal that I am able to ascertain, whereas Confucius wanted an ordered society, which is not such a bad idea. But his reading of the hexagrams are consistent with that. And perhaps trusting in a woman's divination is not. I know there's a little bit revolutionary, but as I say, when I teach this, I claim that I don't consult authorities that are newer than 3,000 years. And this is the reason. So first slide, look at consistency, look at your place in the structure, see if you're respecting that, see if that's what the problem is about. Good fences make for good neighbors. The second line, no place to advance to, indoors, preparing food, constancy brings good fortune. The Chinese word cheng, translated here as constancy. I have combined various translations, but I have to credit Wu Jingyuan particularly. Constancy brings good fortune.